Down here on Panther Point, on the outside, all the shell, hard-packed sand off the point, around this area, all the way back down here, all the way toward Cedar Lake on this outside edge. That's where we are targeting a lot of trout. These fish are starting to really show up on the shell now. So if you're fishing reefs, wherever you're at, whether it be in Aransas Bay or Mesquite Bay or Ayers or up here in San Antonio Bay, these fish are showing up on the reefs. So really start to target that. If trout are what you're trying to find and what you want, that's where your fish are hanging out. So we just spent a lot of time, just a really small area, man, just really taking our time, working the outer edge of all this, working the points, working the flat of it. Kind of came inside just a little bit, but not too terribly much. A little bit more over, and there's a couple little spots in here. It's got some shell on the inside here. We found some fish that were on that, and primarily it was all trout. We did not pull out any redfish or anything to that effect. The little gut that's right here, and then of course you can come out here and start kind of working down this part. It may take a little bit of a tail whipping to get there, depending on what kind of wind you got, what's going on, what your tide conditions are. But it's worth the run, depending on where you're coming from. If you're coming out of, St. Charles, if you're coming to Copano Bay Bridge, Charlie's Bait Camp, or coming out of Seadrift, Port O'Connor, any of those areas, it's worth the trip because there's plenty of trout that are in there. Of course, we caught a lot of undersized trout. There were a lot of those, 12 to 14s that were in there. But about every fifth one that you would catch would be a pretty solid 18, 19-inch trout that were stacked in there as well. So we just, we kind of took our time with it. We didn't do anything really fast. It was very slow and methodical working all this area in here. Just work the shell. These fish were hanging off of that. A lot of dolphins were working in those areas too, so that's a great indicator as well that they're hunting the same thing. So, like I say, we just spent a little time there, and once the bite kind of tapered off a little bit, we just kind of worked more down the shoreline, back down towards Cedar Lake. Our water kind of dropped out on us as well, so some of that area was not really accessible. So we stayed more on the outside, fishing all the more hard pack, found the grass beds, and that's where we found our better fish, was in and around those types of things as well. Is those grass beds were kind of hanging out there where those fish were on that. Still a lot of these fish, some of the fish that we have kept, they've got a lot of eggs, man. A lot of these fish, they've not laid their eggs yet. So just another thing that there still is a possibility that you can find a really great fish of a lifetime. So because they're still pretty heavy with their eggs. So if you find one of those restricted slot fish that's in that 26 to 29 inch range, she's probably going to be pretty decent fish. You're probably what we're seeing with some of the younger trout that we have kept and cleaned. So just keep that in mind. So we're finishing off, or we had finished off the transition moon, headed into the new moon. We had just gotten into the first 5 or 6 days of the new moon phase. So our bites were kind of crazy, kind of wonky. Nothing really great. It wasn't just like turned on, but our bites all came in and around the minor. And if you were able to work the major during the day or late mornings or however it worked out for you, we had a few more bites during that time frame. But in between those bite frames was we had to scratch and claw and try to find. So like I say, it hadn't really kicked in as far as that new moon phase. So I'm looking up this next 4 or 5 good opportunity depending on where you're fishing. You should have some great opportunity there during those minors. If you can incorporate a major in there as well, then you should have a little bit extended opportunity, and hopefully the in-between bite frame is pretty good as well. So main baits that we were using, we were pretty much sticking with our original size in the down south and the burner shad. Multiple different flavors: Twisted Tea, Big Papa, White Ice, Bone Diamond. Purple Rain was another one that we were throwing. Watermelon Red in the original size. And then the same flavors in the original. Didn't throw anything bigger than that. Knock and Tail was pretty much the greenback. Filtered in a little bit of heavy metal here and there, just depending on what the water clarity was. And then, of course, your Little Johns, both that and the XL in the Truth. the golden red glitter, the kitchen sink were the main ones. And of course, watermelon red in that as well. All did pretty well for us for the most part. Did brew or Pav lures in that. Little bit of topwater action just to see if we could get any strikes or any type of opportunities with that. Really not much that was very aggressive with that. So we just kind of tried to stay with our normal stuff, just kind of work these areas, work the outer edge of these areas. And I say deeper water, 3 foot maybe that we're throwing out there. What we're starting to, that trend is starting to happen where you're starting to get to that 9 to 10 o'clock hour, and that trout bite's starting to taper off. So water temps are in the mid 80s. And of course, as much sun as we're getting right now, we've had a little bit of rain here and there that's been very beneficial for us, but at the same time, we're getting more sunshine. So that water temps are beginning to rise a little bit at a time as the mornings progress. But, we're starting out 82, 83 and getting into that 84, 85, which is you don't think is that significant, but it is for this fish. So late morning bites have been very difficult. Early morning bites have been better for us. So just continue to work that trend and just stay with that for now. Out here on the point of mud, these are the kind of areas that we're really starting to focus in on: the hard packed sand, the grass, the drops, the edges, the guts, the passes. All that, man, in the front side of mud gives you all that opportunity. As you get back around here, specifically where the oyster farm is, right out here in the front. You've got the shoreline edge where you've got some drops and guts that are in there that drop off pretty deep, depending on what your tides are, and you can get a little deep, which we did. We did a couple of days that were out there where we had a little bit higher tide in there, and we were like neck deep trying to get out to where that grass little flat is, or that bar that's out there a little closer to where the oyster farm is. So be careful of that if you're going to work that and do that kind of things, but that's there. And then you got the little cut that's right into here, and then we get on the other side, and this other side over here gives you a little bit different type of bottom where you got more guts in here, almost like a beach access where you've got a sandbar and a gut, a sandbar and a gut, a sandbar and a gut. And that happens all the way down to this area down through here. So what we're finding is, whether what side we're fishing on, we're trying to focus on the grass and fish the potholes and fish the edges of the bars and that kind of thing. So those are where we're starting to yield some fish. Some better fish are kind of hanging in that, but we found some pretty decent fish in these guts, fishing off those bars, because those in between there, they're fairly deep. They're weightable, depending on what your tide is on that any given day. That you may be anywhere from belly deep to maybe chest deep in some of these spots, but it just depends on what you're comfortable with and what you want to do and what you want to contend with. So these areas are not that bad whatsoever. But that's what we're locating. We're locating our bait that's in there, and then we got the right kind of structure that's in there. Again, the same baits that we're throwing anywhere in any of these estuaries, just kind of based on what our water clarity is. More so on this side with our prevailing southeast breeze that we're kicking through here. We've had some pretty high winds the last few days heading into the weekend, in the first part of the week. But that said, when you find a protected shoreline, you can find some pretty clean water, and then when you find that clean water, you're finding some fish that are in those areas. So again, the Little John, the Truth, the kitchen sink, golden red glitter did really well for us. Watermelon red was a little bit better in the little bit more stained or dirtier water. If you were fishing some water that was unprotected, it was pretty good for us. And then, of course, in the down south, we were fishing the Twisted Tea, the Big Papa, the white ice and bone diamond. White ice in certain estuaries was doing pretty well on a pretty consistent clip. So if you haven't had that in your box, you might want to put that back in there and do pretty good with it. Soft dines and mirror dines, both a little bit smaller profile heading into this new moon. Could be another thing that would be well suited for you. We threw a little bit of that, not a whole lot. Just didn't spend a lot of time with it. Just stuck with our plastics for the most part in the past days, and that way We just found a more consistent pattern with those flavors and with those sizes. The original size did pretty good. You know, the original size and the Little Johns are all pretty close as far as length and profile. We put the XL, Little John XL on there. Gave it just a little bit, not a big difference in profile, but it's just enough, just subtle difference that made a little bit of a difference for us in on a particular day. Here and there, they wanted just a little bit bigger bait. And with that, we caught some a little bit better fish. Now, when I say better, I'm talking, 17 to 19-inch fish. That and trout. Redfish-wise, not so much. Didn't really, just kind of focusing on trout at the moment. And just kind of finding and working these areas all the way down. It gives you the same type of bottom, same kind of structure that's all in there. So just kind of take your time, spend a little time and work in these areas. You've got your bait in the area. You've got the right structure in your area, and just go to work with your different baits. As I say, we're fixing to be in that. We're really in the new moon phase now. So this upcoming week should give you some really good opportunities depending on where you fish. Here in East Pocket up there in St. Charles Bay, you've got all the shell in St. Charles is all up in the front. Once you get past, there's a little gas well that's it's a little bit past where the little two-hole ramp is there on St. Charles, there on Lamar Beach Road. Once you get past that, pretty much all the shell is done for. So the majority of the shell is up front, all around here, Bird Point, East Pocket, all these areas up in here. You got a lot of shell, a lot of opportunity that's in and around all this area here. So again, what I was telling you earlier, trout are starting to show up on the shell. They're starting to. They're showing up on the shell. They're there. If you find some areas that's got some bait working on that, you can get out there. You've got these poles that they put out there, just kind of marking the beginning and the end of these reefs that are there, and you can weight them. The last 3 days of the week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe a little bit into Monday, our tides were a little bit lower than what they had been. So it opened up these opportunities in these areas for you to be able to wade off of that. Now, when you get the super big high tides, it's kind of hard to do it. But, all this area, and if you fish the East Pocket area, you've got a lot of shell that's in there. I know a lot of the airboat guys go out through the cut that go out in Blackjack Point, and there's a lot of shell that's around all that area. So it gives you opportunity to fish that. And then you can come back around here on the inside, on this shoreline here, and get a little bit more protection if you don't want to contend with the more open wind that's there. And you can weight all that. And we found a couple redfish here and there. Nothing great. Lower slot, 21s, 22-inch redfish. Like I say, wasn't great numbers. But, again, I'm just more focused on the trout at the moment and just trying to find some better trout. Specifically the trout that are in the upper restricted slot in that 20 to 30-inch range. That's what we're really trying to target and see if we can't still pick some of those up. Like I said earlier, a lot of these fish are still holding eggs. They have not dropped them yet, so you still have an opportunity to find you a nice heavier trout somewhere. So this is another one of these areas that you can get to. Take this all the way up, all the way to Egg Point. You have some great grass beds that are all through this shoreline that put you up there in the inside of Egg. We found a lot of trout up in that area, some pretty decent trout, a little thicker, a little chunkier trout that were in there. And then, of course, when you get over here on Ernest Point, on this side over here, you've got all that shell that's in there that's right off the big tree area. You can wade in and around those areas as well. Found a lot of fish in and around that. So, again, the trout are on the shell, whether you're fishing in here, if you're fishing out in Aransas, where you're fishing Copano, it doesn't matter. If you can get yourself posted up, whether you want to weight it, whether you want to post up and throw bait up there against it, you can do that. A lot of these fish are holding up in and around that type of stuff and that type of structure. So that really needs to be your focal point here, at least for the foreseeable future this coming week. Now, outside of that, that's probably going to be the norm, I would imagine, for the rest of this month and probably well into July. These fish are going to be in and around these shell bars and shell reefs. So really kind of focus on that and let that be your kind of game plan moving forward, unless you just really want to focus on something else, i.e. redfish or flounder. But we're trying to really focus on trout, work these areas, hard packed sand, like I say, the shell, all that. Same flavors, what I just mentioned in the last two videos. That's what you really want. You probably can start going up size and start getting into this big 5 and 6 inch things, and what the Coastal Brew and the Pav lures, and then of course the Big Smooth in the down south has as well. Those may be baits that you want to put on there. And of course, this is where your Little John XL comes into play as well. Like I say, it's not a 5-inch bait, but it's a little bit fatter profile bait. So sometimes these trout or redfish may want that just a little bit bigger profile. And they get a little bit hungrier during that time frame. So really focus on your minors and majors that are coming up this upcoming week. Pay attention to what your weather patterns are, and make sure you really pay attention to what your tides are, because that's really fluctuating right now. So you don't put yourself in jeopardy getting somewhere you think there's more water than what there actually is, and you kind of run up on a shell bar, because there's lots of these that are up there in the St. Charles Bay area, the Mesquite, Carlos, all those areas up there hold all that kind of stuff. So enjoy your upcoming week. Pay attention. Again, make sure you pay attention to what your weather patterns are going to be. We got some potential for rain this upcoming week, so which we can still use. But if you get a chance to go fish this week, have a lot of fun and be safe.